This part of our lecture concerns Islamic beliefs, and so for these slides, a lot of it is self-explanatory. If at any point I'm going too fast, you know what to do. Just pause the video and write down what you need to write down. But otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and move through this so we can keep going. So, Islam is very closely related to Judaism and Christianity. They share a origin in the prophet Abraham and in their belief in the same God. Okay, so it's going to incorporate many of those traditions that we see in Judaism and in Christianity, except a difference is that in Judaism, which we see depicted here, Jewish people do not perceive Jesus to be the Son of God. They see him as perhaps a prophet, but not as the promised Messiah in their religion. Under Christianity, which is represented here with Catholicism, there's going to be the belief that Jesus was the promised Messiah, and thus that begins the New Testament part of the Bible. In the Islamic faith, however, Jesus is going to be considered a prophet, but he is not the Son of God, and Muhammad is the final prophet in a long line of other prophets. The Quran, or their holy book, is going to contain the teachings of the prophet, which he received from the archangel Gabriel. The fundamental beliefs of Islam include the 5 pillars. The first pillar is the declaration of faith, which says that there is only one God. So this is, once again, monotheism, and that God is Allah. You have the obligatory prayer, which is going to take place at different time periods throughout the day. Compulsory giving of alms to help the poor. Fasting during the holy month of Ramadan. And last pillar is optional if there are impediments to completing the 5th pillar. It's not necessarily required, but it is highly encouraged to engage in a pilgrimage to Mecca, to the Kaaba. So the first pillar, the declaration of faith, teaches that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. And this is the declaration of faith that needs to be made. Similar to in Christianity and Judaism, in the concept of the 10 Commandments, the first commandment followed by the Jews and the Christians is a declaration of faith that there is only one God and that no other God shall be worshipped. So that is a similarity that we see between those monotheistic religions. And keep in mind, comparison is one of your historical thinking skills. So you could be asked to compare and contrast the different world religions that we study in this course. And so it would be good to make note of those similarities and those differences as you find them. Next, there's the second pillar, which involves praying 5 times a day. Now, in this prayer, you do have to face Mecca, so there is a shift from praying and facing Jerusalem, which was considered the holy city, and it's holy for not only the Muslims, but also for Christians and Jewish people. But instead of facing Jerusalem for the prayers, now the Muslims face Mecca, because Mecca was conquered in 632 by Muhammad after he returned from Yathrib or Medina. And these prayers don't happen in quick succession like, oh, you wake up in the morning and pray 5 times in a row. They're broken up throughout the day depending on sunrise and sunset. The third pillar is related to charity by acquiring a 2.5% tax in order to provide for the less fortunate. This is similar to what is in the Christian faith in terms of a tithe, where typically that is comprised of 10%, but it's not considered obligatory or compulsory. The fourth pillar involves fasting during the month of Ramadan, and the month of Ramadan isn't the same month every year. It could take place at different times throughout the year. And so during this holy month, Muslims cannot eat or drink while the sun is up. So they will eat and drink after sunset and before sunrise. There are exceptions to this as well. If you're ill or it would be dangerous for you to fast during this time period, you can put that off until a later date and then essentially make up the last month that you missed for Ramadan once you're in a better health condition. The 5th pillar is the pilgrimage to Mecca, also known as the Hajj, Hajj, whereas you can see here in the middle of this swirling circle, and this is just showing a change over time with people walking around and circling the Kaaba. At the very center is the sacred black stone in the middle of Mecca that used to be a temple for the polytheistic gods that were in Mecca that brought so many pilgrimages and thus money to Mecca, but now was redesignated by the Prophet once he came and reconquered Mecca with his army, and it was rededicated to the one true God. And so as you can see here, it's a very, very huge event that's supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime thing that you do in order to show your faith. And up until recently with the coronavirus, you had non-stop movement in terms of people performing this pilgrimage to Mecca. Now, in the days of the corona, that has significantly slowed. So the entire Muslim population in the world is known as the Ummah. So it doesn't matter if you're Sunni or Shia or Sufi, you are a part of the Ummah if you are a part of the population of Muslim believers. And so in terms of what the population of Muslim believers today looks like, we have about 1.62 billion Muslims worldwide, and the Ummah, the entire population of Muslim believers, makes up almost a fourth of the entire human population. And so this is a very, very significant portion that participates in this particular monotheistic religion. You're going to see that predominantly they're going to be centered in the Middle East and in North Africa, and that's due to the cultural diffusion of this belief system through trade and conquest. Following the death of Muhammad, Muslims are going to form a code of law known as Sharia laws, and these serve to guide the behavior, family life, and business and community of the Ummah. And so you'll see in this map that there are variations in what parts of Sharia law are followed. I believe it's from various hadiths that followed after Muhammad's death. And then there are areas where the Sharia law applies in full, where it's not only a religious obligation, but it's also a legal obligation. Whereas in yellow, it is a personal choice whether or not you choose to follow the code in Sharia law. Islam, like the other monotheistic religions at the time and all the civilizations that we're going to study in world history, were patriarchal, meaning that men tend to dominate positions of power and authority in society. But compared to their contemporaries, compared to Christian women and Jewish women in this time period, Islamic women had a higher status than those in Europe. So you're going to see that even though it's still very much so a patriarchal society, because all societies in this time period are overwhelmingly patriarchal, women do have some more freedoms under Islam. For instance, female infanticide is going to be made illegal. Infanticide, if you look at the stem word side, it means murder. So like if you think homicide, you know that that's a death of a person. So infanticide is the death of a child or a baby. So it was considered more profitable, it was considered better to have a son rather than a daughter. And in order to save money on raising a daughter who eventually would be married off into another family, infanticide was practiced. But once Muhammad comes to power, not only as a religious leader, but also as a political and military figure, he is going to make this practice illegal. You're also going to see the shift in how dowries are paid. Previous to Islam, dowries were considered a bride price, and they would be paid to the husband, not to the wife. And so you see that that wealth is going to be used to enrich the man rather than the woman. Under Islam, that's going to shift, and instead that money goes to the bride so that she can have some sort of economic independence. Interestingly enough, Muhammad's wife was a very intelligent and educated woman who helped him with managing his caravan business. And so you're going to see that there's a resulting higher status for Islamic women compared to their contemporaries in the Christian or Jewish faith. Other examples of their privileges that they enjoyed included the practice of birth control. They could remarry if they were widowed, and they could testify in court. Now, in testifying in court, they were protected from retaliation or basically revenge for testifying, but it is still a patriarchal society, so this doesn't mean men and women are considered equal. There is still the dominance of society by the male. So the woman's testimony in a case was only worth half that of a man. So in order to keep a case against a man, you would have to have at least two women coming forth as witnesses, as opposed to just one woman. And the testimony of the man trumps the testimony of the woman. So even though there is a difference in terms of this society at this time is less patriarchal compared to others at the time, you still have to designate it as patriarchal. So this is where you get into the question of what is the extent to which society was patriarchal or was not patriarchal. In that same vein of the patriarchy, men and women, according to the Quran, were equal in the eyes of God, but there were still going to be some restrictions on the social and thus the sexual lives of women, because basically when it comes to having legitimate heirs, a father may not be 100% sure that the child is his, but a mother is always 100% sure that that child is hers, because she is the one who births that child. So in order to ensure that the child that is produced is not only the result of the woman, but also of her husband, they would very strictly control the social lives of the women. Here's an excerpt from the Quran that kind of explains this. Those who surrender themselves to Allah and accept the true faith, who are devout, sincere, patient, humble, charitable, and chaste, who fast and are mindful of Allah, on these, both men and women, Allah will bestow forgiveness and rich reward. So once again, that sign of they're equal in the eyes of God, but in terms of the patriarchal society, women are still going to be controlled in some form or fashion during this time period. And then we can trace that back to the foundations of the Neolithic Revolution. Once you have the foundation of farming start, you start seeing patriarchal societies emerge. Before the Neolithic Revolution, before the invention of farming, during the Paleolithic time period, you're going to see that there was a lot more gender equality because everyone had the same job of hunter or gatherer. In terms of polygamy, like we said before, polygamy is the marriage to more than one wife. Muslim men were allowed to have up to, but no more, than 4 wives, much like the Prophet himself, but women were not allowed to practice polyandry. Women could not practice polygamy in that they couldn't have multiple husbands. It was still one husband for them, multiple wives for the husband. Muslims are going to adopt a Persian custom or a Mesopotamian custom of wearing veils in public. Basically, in Mesopotamia, this is one of the early river civilizations that the AP curriculum has cut off from our curriculum this year. But in the early Mesopotamian culture, women who wore veils were seen as having a higher social status. So if you were someone important, you would be veiled. There's even an excerpt in one of my earlier tests that I would give back when we were teaching this part of the curriculum that talks about a woman being punished for wearing a veil when she wasn't anyone important. She was actually very low in society, but she was still going around wearing a veil, and so she actually had to be punished legally for that. And so from Mesopotamia, you're going to see that sign of social status of wearing a veil is going to continue culturally. So that's an aspect of cultural diffusion coming from Mesopotamia and then being adopted in the Arabian Peninsula. And so there's going to be different versions of these veils. Here we have the example of the hijab, which is a head covering and an extended scarf. You have the chador, which is going to cover not only the head but also the face, leaving the eyes and the hands and the feet uncovered. And then lastly, the burqa, which is going to cover everything, including the hands and the eyes, with a thin veil for being able to see. So this is another example of the patriarchy in terms of the cultural aspects that are adopted for women as opposed to men. And all of that can be traced back to the early development of towns and cities after the invention or the adoption of farming. But it's important to note that today, the wearing of religious garments, whether that's in Christianity, like with a nun, or in Judaism, or in Islam, is a matter of choice. For instance, you may see in Christian art depicting the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. The Virgin Mary is often depicted as wearing a veil or having her head covered. So this isn't something that is new or that was invented under this particular monotheistic religion. You're going to see that it has a long historical continuity in all of the major monotheistic religions. And so an excerpt from the Quran that helps support this cultural practice: "And say to the believing women that they should lower their gaze and guard their modesty, that they should not display their beauty and ornaments." Islamic houses of worship are called mosques, and the Sabbath is often observed on Fridays. And so this is a key difference between the monotheistic faiths that we're going to discuss in this course. In Christianity, the Sabbath is typically observed on Sundays. In Judaism, the Sabbath is typically observed on Saturdays, and in Islam, the Sabbath is observed on Fridays. So it's interesting to note how, even though they all have the same origin story and they all worship the same God, that holy day of rest differs between the three. Also, in Islam, the house of worship is known as a mosque, whereas in Christianity, it's often called a church. In Judaism, it's often referred to as the temple. So, very interesting difference in the houses of worship. Here, it says that they're often identifiable by minarets. Those are these towers that we see here. Okay, so these are minarets. And this is where a group of people or a position known as the muezzin would come to call the faithful. Because remember, one of the pillars of the faith, one of the 5 pillars, was that call to prayer, meaning that they would have to pray 5 times a day. And so before the invention of cell phones with apps and with alarms, you would basically have to wait for the call to prayer that would stem from the mosque. And so that's how you would know, okay, it's approaching the time to pray. We would hear these calls coming from the minarets, and then everyone would face towards Mecca. That is going to conclude our very brief overview of the basic core tenets and beliefs in Islam before we move on to the split in the Ummah, the split in the Muslim faith between the Sunni and the Shia.